This is a very, very interesting subject. It's one that a lot of people don't like to talk about, and I share this with you tonight from the standpoint. So if in the event you would have something where damage was caused, or you get a judgment against you, you lose a lawsuit, whatever, we want to make sure that you guys are protected. So what I'm going to do here tonight is kind of give you the 35,000 foot level, because if we get too far in the weeds here tonight, it's going to get very complicated very quick. Okay. But I would ask for each of you for a New Year's resolution is to contact an asset protection company or an attorney, and sit down and see what you need to have, because it can get a little frightening. One of the asset protection attorneys I've worked with, he talked about this couple. And again, I share this with you tonight, not so you can't sleep tonight, okay, but for the standpoint to, maybe make you realize I do need to look at this a little further. But the husband and wife, they owned a duplex, and a renter got harmed in the duplex, okay, substantially. Okay, and so they had owned the duplex in their personal name, okay, and so they lost the suit, okay. They came through, they took whatever money they had on insurance, which wasn't very much. Then they went through and they took the duplex to satisfy their judgment, and then they went to their personal residence and forced them to sell that residence to satisfy that judgment. Okay, so being in their 60s, where they thought they had some, income, rental income, they had their house free and clear and all this, everything went upside down absolutely overnight. Okay, and it could have been avoided. Most insurance, and again, I'm not an insurance expert, mainly informational, but normally a life they consider is worth about $5 million. Okay, now depending on the age of the person, that's debatable, but in actuality, that's actually sometimes the cheapest way, because if somebody is 35 years old, has 3 kids, and they're under 10 years old, and they get maimed and they can't work for the next 30, 40 years, it's not going to be 5 million. It's going to probably be triple that. Okay. So that's why it's very, very important that these things are looked at. So with that said, let me go to the next item here, and we'll move on through some information. So it's basically, there's more than 4, but 4 main strategies to protect your real estate. And when I say protect your real estate, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about your personal residence as well as your rental properties. Okay. All right. So the first one to protect yourself is landlord insurance, or what they call a DP3 policy, which is kind of an open peril, which means that it covers most items. Now, sometimes in some policies, it may not cover, let's say you have a built-in stove and you have a built-in dishwasher, but the refrigerator isn't built in, or the washer dryer isn't built in. Okay. In order to cover those, you might have to have a little bit extra different type of policy. Okay. But normally a landlord policy, that is set up correctly. Okay. That is one of your best steps as far as in terms of, protecting yourself. Okay. The first thing of it is here is if you have 3 properties or less, you need to be looking where you have about 5 million, okay, per property, and 500,000 in liability. That means each property would pay out that 5 million. Okay, and because sometimes it's all included in insurance. Okay, and the reason we put that, because in most cases that's going to cover most of any damage you'd receive. Now, damage isn't just because a renter gets hurt. It could be other lawsuits. It could be, let's say they got sick and very ill because of mold or something. Okay, and they could prove that you were negligent as far as in not taking care of that. Well, there's something else they could come against you on. So it isn't just if somebody's getting injured. It could be a number of things as far as on there. So that's what we would recommend. Now, again, that's what we're recommending as far as on an information basis, but you need to get with your insurance company. If you don't have one, we have a couple of people that you can speak to that write these kinds of policies. And, or you can, use your own insurance company. The main thing is that you get something done on it. Now, if you have 4 or more properties, okay, you're probably going to want to have a commercial umbrella policy, okay? And it just extends a little bit further. Again, $5 million per property and $500,000 in liability. What happens in most cases, a lot of these policies, they might have $1 million. And you may think $1 million is a lot, but just litigation expenses alone, could hurt you. Okay. And so you want to make certain that you have you have the right insurance, and B, you're with a reputable company. Okay. And you want to go with an insurance company that's not going to be out of business, because of their financials and things. And that can happen because like in South Florida, we have a lot of hurricanes, and you have a lot of hurricanes, you got a lot of properties that are damaged. Okay. And some of these insurance companies have come on the brink of not being able to, pay out. So just be careful of that. Sometimes cheap isn't always better. A few more bucks, it's worth it to have a really responsible insurance company. So for an example, in this, one of our investors has 12 properties, and believe it or not, he has this policy right here, commercial umbrella, on each of those properties, and his premiums is just $1,080 a year. Now, I want to say also, he also has his vehicles, his personal residence, and his business with this company as well. So he's probably getting a favorable rate. But if you have 12 properties, you can protect it that way. Then sometimes insurance becomes the simplest way to go ahead and have protection compared to some of the other things I'm going to mention here in just a second. So if you want to be protected, but you don't want to spend a lot of time and you want to feel safe, this is the best way to go as far as on your insurance there. Okay. Next one is an LLC. Okay. That stands for Limited Liability Company. Okay. It's recommended, and I have accounts in Wyoming myself. Okay. Because in the state of Wyoming and Delaware, you just get better protection. Okay. And the cost of the LLC is less. However, if you still own the property in California, you're going to get hit with an $800 bill every year for each LLC you have. Okay. And so for example, again, one of the attorneys I've worked with, it was a case where Citibank, they had gotten a judgment for $3 million, but the LLC was set up in Wyoming. Well, in Wyoming, compared to California, in California, if somebody has a judgment against you, they're going to come right through everything and they're going to go ahead and collect on the judgment. But not so fast in Wyoming. They don't allow you to do that. They don't allow you to force them to sell a property or business to settle the judgment. You can take some of the cash flow that's coming out of there, but you can't force that owner to sell. Well, I guess in Citibank's case, he said to me, the attorney, he said, well, if you want me to fight it, and he says, to be honest, I have no guarantees I can get that lifted in Wyoming. It's going to cost you about $200,000. We're going to be in, trial for another couple of years. Or you might want to consider settling. And so what happened is that's exactly what happened. Is Citibank settled with the person they had the judgment on, and they got their money right away rather than trying to collect it over the next 30 years. So it's a negotiating tool, okay, if you would have a judgment against you, to reduce the amount of a judgment. Okay. All right. So this here, it limits your exposure to just this property. So if you have a property on John Street and you have an LLC on that property, okay, if there were something was to happen, okay, and let's say, for an example, the house is worth $400,000 and you owe, let's say, $250,000. Okay. And let's say, so you have $150,000 in equity, and let's say the judgment was for $500,000. Okay. What that means is that the person that has a judgment against you can only go against that property. They can't go through, like I explained earlier, where they went through and they took the person's personal residence and their bank accounts and all that. They can't do that. It has to stand on its own. So this is your best protection. You should still have some insurance, but sometimes you could have an LLC and insurance. For an example, if you have a property that's free and clear, it might be worth, and if it's worth $500,000-600,000, it might be worth putting, an LLC, on that property. Okay. But you want to make certain that, you have some limits, but your asset attorney or company, they would be the one to look at your portfolio and tell you what you need to do on that. Okay. Now, what happens in an LLC box stays in the box. In other words, what I mean, they can't go outside and collect on other assets you have. Okay. So it's one of the best ways if you want to feel safe and you say, you know what, I don't care about the $800. My house is going up $20,000 a year or $30,000, and it makes me sleep at night. So you know what, that's the direction I'm going to go. Okay. And so you can look at that to maybe use it as a vehicle to protect your assets. Okay. The next one, the next two, I should say, is they get much more complicated, and you should definitely use an attorney to guide you through this, because basically what you can do, you can use multiple LLCs with lines of credit, what they call lock, to show that you have no equity in the property when you actually do. I know it sounds very confusing, but you can actually do that, and it's legal to do that. Okay. And so some people that have a lot of property, that's what they'll do. Because here's what happens. If Tyler has a case, and let's say he wanted to go ahead and file suit on a landlord, the first thing that his attorney is going to do, they're going to do a search and see what that landlord has in assets. I'm talking stock, I'm talking real estate, I'm talking everything. But if they come in and they can't see that that person has any assets, the odds of Tyler getting an attorney to represent him on a contingency basis are slim to none. Okay. But if they can see, whoa, Tyler's got $4 million over here altogether. So now they're going, hey, okay, we'll take this case. So it can sometimes divert an actual case from even being brought against you in the first place. Okay. The fourth strategy gets even more involved, and that is anonymity. Okay. In other words, you can use multiple LLCs with out-of-state LLCs to show that you don't even own the property. I know this might be just very strange for some of you who have never heard of any of this. Okay. But you've heard it on TV, like they go, well, yeah, we don't even know what this person owns, right? Well, that's because they went buried it so deep that they can't find it. Okay. As far as in here, and it's legal to do this. Okay. Totally legal. But again, it's really for somebody on item 3 and 4 here that's got multiple properties. For the most part, for most of the investors we work with, you could probably get by with LLCs and insurance or a combination thereof. Okay. Those would be the two that you would want to look at to make it simple. Okay. Let's talk about personal resident asset protection. Okay. First of all, you have Homestead Law, but that is not the same as a homestead tax exemption. Okay, they're separate. Okay, so your Homestead Law guards you against a judgment on your residence, but a homestead tax exemption is where you can reduce your property taxes to some degree. And every state is different, and they calculate it different in every state. And I'm going to talk about the latter one first. So why would you want to do that? Well, if you can get a homestead tax exemption, we're always trying to find ways to put money in your pocket. And let's say you could even save, whatever. It might be $500, it might be $2,500 a year, but it's every year. If you could save that on a tax exemption, why not, right? Sometimes if you do that, what we charge in management fees becomes free, right? So now you got a free management fee because you picked up where you can, find another $2,500 a year as far as on a tax exemption. Now let's go back to Homestead Law as far as itself. In some states you have unlimited, and other states you have limited homestead. For an example, in Florida we have unlimited. Means in Florida all your equity is protected. Okay, so if somebody gets a judgment for you and you got $1 million house and they got a judgment for $1 million or $2 million, they can't take your home. They can maybe take other assets you have, but they can't take your home They can't take your retirement and things of that nature. Okay. That's why O.J. Simpson lives in Florida. Okay. Because he can have a multi-million-dollar home and they can't touch it. Okay. And they can't touch his NFL retirement. So, you know, his attorneys, obviously from the get-go, they probably knew where this was going, but that's where that's at. Now we come back to California. Well, not so good. Okay, the max right now, and some of that is changing, is $75,000 is the equity that you can protect. Basically, why bother, right? Okay, for $75,000. I'm not saying $75,000 is a lot of money, but if somebody got a judgment for $1 million, that $75,000 isn't going to cover very much, correct? All right. And so in California, compared to maybe Florida or other states as well that have good homestead, what you need to do there is you need to definitely make sure you have a higher umbrella as far as on your insurance policy to protect you. Okay, as far as on it. Some schools of thoughts like, well, like the gentleman I said he had 12 properties. Well, let's face it, if he had to pay $800 and he had each of them in a separate LLC, okay, then he'd be paying out $9,600 a year every year just for LLCs to the state of California, compared to taking it where he could take it for $1,080 a year, and he can protect himself up to $5,500,000 in liability on each property. Okay. One other thing sometimes people will do out of those 12 properties is, let's say they had 6 of them that were highly leveraged, and they didn't have a lot of equity in them. You know, they may put them in one LLC and then properties that didn't have a lot of loans on them into another LLC. So sometimes you can split them up like that. The only challenge of it is, if they come against you, they can come against you on all 6 properties, for example, not just one. Okay, so it's kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't. But I can say this is insurance, even myself, okay, is where I lay heavy. I do have some LLCs, but I lay very, very heavy on the insurance. Because once you have a property in an LLC, you have some other things that you have to do. One, there's additional paperwork. It can be more difficult to get a loan if you have it in an LLC, or even a trust, the living trust. Okay, because sometimes you have to pull it out of there, get your loan, and then you got to put it back in. Okay, and so it gets very busy from that end. Interest rates could be higher if you're getting it on an LLC compared to your own personal self, you know, and then you have annual filings and fees that we've just talked about. So there's pros and cons, but at the end of the day, you still want to be protected, you know, so you don't have to give it all away, you know, should something happen. A lot of times people say, well, why do I need asset protection on my personal house? You know, I don't even own a rental property. Well, here's why. Okay, you're going down the freeway, okay, and unfortunately you rear end somebody on the freeway. Okay, God forbid they get maimed, or worse yet, you've been fatal, or both. Okay, what's going to happen is they're going to go, first of all, they're going to go and they're going to find out whatever you own. That's what their attorneys are going to do. Okay, then what they're going to do is they're going to go against your insurance company. Okay, and if you don't have enough insurance, they're coming right through your insurance to your house, and they're going to take your house to settle that judgment, is what's going to happen. Okay, now again, contact your insurance, you know, professionals, so they can lay this out. Again, I just want to share this with you tonight to kind of let you know that we got to be careful, even if you don't own a rental property. Okay. And so it's because you could, maybe you're not big into real estate, but you have stocks. Okay. I mean, I know people have got several $1 million in stocks. Well, you know, you got another situation there, right? So you got to be very careful on how you take care of your money. So it's kind of like the old saying, working on your business instead of in it. Well, when you own rental property or even your own personal residence, you are in a business. Whether you put yourself in that category or not, you are. Okay. As far as IRS is concerned, if you have a rental property, you're in business. Okay. That's why they allow you to write off what you can as far as on your rental properties and stuff. Okay. Now, one last thing is, and this gets more complicated, It's a land trust. Don't confuse that with it's just land, but it's just a vehicle that you use. With a Wyoming LLC, it gets the property out of your name and gives you negotiating power again if you do get a judgment against you. So on your personal residence, if you want a little bit more protection, this is something else that you can talk to an asset protection company or an attorney about, so you feel more comfortable. Because let's face it, guys, I mean, looking in the last year, I mean, these prices have went unbelievable in Southern California. I mean, Orange County, 800,000-900,000 doesn't buy you much, right? And even in the Inland Empire, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, properties I bought 30 years ago, what they're worth today, I could have never imagined it. Okay. My mentor, you know, he made me buy property, and I thank him every day. Okay. But at the end of the day, it's like you just can't even believe it. But you get number 700,000-800,000 million. You know, some of you on this call probably have properties worth 2, 3, or 5, 10 million. Okay. And you just want to make sure that you're taken care of, because you got a lot of situations going on. And if not for you, do it for your kids or their kids. You know what I'm saying? All right. So basically, in the summary of this is basically, like I say, if you have your own personal residence, you got to have the protection. And if you own rental properties, you definitely need protection. Okay. And so step one is contact your insurance company. If they don't have, or you don't feel they're knowledgeable enough, call us. We'll refer you a couple of different people. We don't get anything out of it. Just so you know, I have no interest in that, at all. We just want to make sure that, if you are a client of ours and we've helped you build some wealth over the last 25, 35 years, we want you to be keeping that wealth, as far as with you. So very, very important from that standpoint. Okay. So next step is, like I say, consult with an asset protection attorney or your insurance company. Okay. Any questions?
We do have some questions, Ron. One person says, if they live in Nevada, for example, but they have rental properties in California, where does the law go? On the California side or the state you reside in, or both?
It's where the property is, where the rental property is. Okay. And also in our next webinar, we're going to be talking about living trust and stuff. And that brings up another interesting thing there. On a living trust, if let's say you have all your properties in a trust, but then you buy after the trust is set up, because people never revisit their trust. I don't know why, but they don't. Okay. And then a year later, you buy another property in or two, and let's say they're in two different states, right? If you die, what's going to happen is your living trust, let's say in California, is intact, but the house you have in Arizona and the house you have in Florida, you got to go through probate on those two houses in two individual states. And the probate costs are going to be high. Okay. So you got to make certain, if you're using a living trust, that you should be revisiting that at least probably every 6 months, at worst case, once a year. You should sit down and say, okay, where are we at? I'm not just talking about real estate. I'm talking about all your assets. Okay. And it could also be how you want to allocate, to your children. Okay. A lot of times in a living trust, depending on the age of your children, you may not want to have it where it goes all to them at one time. Okay. Because if you do, okay, maybe they're not in a position, as far as education wise, they haven't been in business long enough to really know how to deal with all these issues. Okay. And so sometimes you have to build in some things to make certain that they don't get all the money at one time and then they end up blowing it. Okay. Not just because they want to buy like Lamborghinis or whatever, but I'm just saying they just don't invest it right. And so sometimes you got to look out that for their own protection, or you could have where maybe you have children, but then they get divorced and now you have other situations that come into play, right? So there's a lot of things to consider as you build wealth, and I think when we do the living trust, I want to have one of the gentlemen on that we can talk and have them share with you some of the things. But, having a trust, having a will set up, is super, super important. You could have a holographical will, and I don't know if you guys know what that is, but you can handwrite it on a piece of paper, that my house goes to this beneficiary, and sign it and date it, and that'll hold up. Okay. But that's if you just got one house, you don't have any other assets and stuff like that, you could do that. But when you start to create any kind of wealth, then you definitely need to make certain that you have a will. But I mean, my thing of it is you could drop a will tonight before you go to bed. Okay. Because they'll check the signature and they'll check how you wrote it out, and it will hold up. In fact, I think sometimes those hold up probably better than the other ones if your portfolio is simple. Okay. But definitely we have people that we can refer you guys to make sure it is taken care of and taken care of correctly. So, all right. Any other questions that we have, Kristen?
There is another question. It kind of goes along with what you're talking about right now, actually. And they're asking, if a personal property is in a trust, does it offer the same protection as you were discussing with the LLCs or the umbrellas of insurance?
If your personal residence is in the trust, I would probably refer to counsel on that. My initial thing, it is. Okay, but I think I would refer to counsel as far as to answer that for you. And we can let's get the information, whoever it is, we'll get counsel, but we'll get you the answer. You don't have to go find an attorney to find it. We'll find it for you and give it to you. Okay.
That's the last question on this topic.
I did want to mention or kind of just put it out there, and Ron, if you could elaborate on it. So can you kind of explain the differences in terms of an S Corp, LLC, those types of things, putting the property potentially into, like I said, an S Corp versus an LLC? What are the pros? What are the cons? Do you have kind of the same protections? Do you not, if it's in an S Corp versus an LLC, if you went that route? Can you kind of touch on that?
Yeah, your LLC is going to be the simplest way to go on that. Your S Corps get a little bit more complicated. But as far as to go through all the pros and cons, that would be pretty extensive. But we can hit on that next time if you want, and get more in the weeds as far as on that. You also got you got a C Corp you could have as well. So there's a lot of different things. And we could have a small session of 20 minutes just on corporations, LLCs, sole proprietor. Basically the bottom line is sole proprietor, when you start owning rental property, that's the last thing you really want to have. Okay. If you can avoid it. So, but again, there's pros and cons of that, because when you go to refi, now you got to take it out, you got to refi it, put it back in.
Right.
So there's a lot of, it gets very complicated very quick.